No, it's good to know when to start.
Yeah. And then I'll just remind us all that we'll have a presentation now from Tadahiro Taniguchi, and then we'll have time for discussion, and Carl will summarize in the end afterwards. And as I understand it, Carl, you have to go right at some point.
Yeah, but don't worry about that.
Good, check. I'm just trying to, as chair, also keep an eye on the time as we go, especially for my own sake, so I don't ask too many questions. Okay, perfect. Then all that's left is to bid Tadahiro Taniguchi a very warm welcome. He is going to tell us today about the collective predictive coding hypothesis, which, as I understand it, is about how communities of agents together can form a predictive coding system. And I've been looking very much forward to this presentation. The word is yours.
Okay. Can I start?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me to this great meeting. So I'm Tadahiro Taniguchi from Kyoto University, and today I'll be talking about collective predictive coding hypothesis and beyond, single emergence as decentralized Bayesian inference. Okay, let's move forward. Okay, first of all, let me introduce myself. So I'm Tadahiro Taniguchi. I've worked at the Lismeka University for 16 years, and during that time, I stayed at London for 1 year. It was already 10 years ago. So actually, this year I moved to Kyoto University and started a new laboratory. So if you have a chance to visit Kyoto, please stop by my laboratory. So my background, let me mention my background. So I have been studying AI and cognitive robotics with a special interest in language. In particular, my long-term research interest is symbol emergence systems. So I have been studying symbol emergence in robotics since about 2010. In these studies, we developed various cognitive models of robots and made them form internal representations, such as learning multimodal object and phrase concept, and acquire language and run world models. So I may introduce some of them later briefly. So today's topic is a collective predictive coding hypothesis. As a preface, let me explain what collective predictive coding, CPC in short, is. This is a kind of hypothesis and perspective I proposed by extending an idea of predictive coding and the free energy principle in a sense. So the CPC hypothesis states that symbol systems, language in particular, is formed by collective predictive coding performed by humans as a society. Therefore, the information of the world is encoded in distributional semantics of language system. So a symbol system, symbol emergence system can be understood as a social representation learning system. I think from the viewpoint of LLM, I think this is the reason why LLMs seem to understand the world as if they had a kind of embodiment. Okay, so let me start my main part of my talk. So before I talk about today's main topic, CPC, let me start with the background story of large language model. It's now kind of common sense, but basically, LLM is based on our language. First of all, we humans have knowledge about language. When we see something, talk about something, or type something on a laptop, we communicate using language. It's a kind of everyday phenomena, but please note that we humans individually have knowledge of language, but they are all different. There is no one person who has perfect knowledge or perfect language. But at the same time, when we output or generate text or speech through this communication, we assume that we have some kind of imaginary language system, shared language outside of our brain. We tend to believe there is a kind of true language system that everyone agrees with, even though it's a kind of imaginary stuff. We all learn language by communication, and we are always updating our linguistic knowledge in a distributed manner. So, but this is what's happening in human history. But recently, about 30 years ago or 40 years ago, we have been able to accumulate huge data as linguistic corpora on the internet and in database. So, and after inventing the large neural network, by internalizing this information by predicting the next token and the kind of distribution of the corpora, a large language model can internalize this kind of information. So, and in our society, we found that the large language models, LLMs, can work well. So through that, it was understood that when human society form language and when LLMs internalize the large language corpora, LLMs can achieve a kind of a high level of practical language understanding or language use. This is a kind of a new finding in this half decade in our human society. So, but some problem still remains from the viewpoint of science. So how can we form language, especially how the property of language formed by society has distributional semantics and unique syntactic structure. And in the absence of being able to see into the other person's mind, how can we share the meanings of sentences and phrases through interactions? So why has human society been able to form such a language without centralized representation learning system? That would be a question. So with this kind of question in my mind, so I propose an idea or a model called symbol emergence systems about 15 years ago. So what is a symbol emergence system? A symbol emergence system is a kind of conceptual model of how symbols and language actually emerge in a society. So many people tend to unconsciously consider the language as a kind of fixed or static and given system. But actually, symbol systems and our language system can change over time and evolve. So also, they have meanings based on our cognition, the experience, feelings, and so on. This symbol emergence system gives us a dynamic view of the formation of symbol systems. So let me explain this figure one by one. First, a person forms the internal representations, which can be called categories or concepts as well. So through representation learning. The representation learning is based on our sensory motor system. And through interaction, we can understand the physical property of object and so on. So it can also be regarded as a kind of the learning world models, which is realized through predictive coding. So these internal representations we have in our mind are not directly related to language. So language or symbols have a kind of arbitrariness. So we can give names, label, or description to some concepts and idea, but such labeling or naming should be shared by society. Without such agreement, sharing, our communication and science are meaningless. So for example, if we call something people power or something, so people power is initially meaningless. But if you understand and agree that we can call this peoplepa, and Taniguchi I call this peoplepa. Then peoplepa immediately has meaning in our community. So peoplepa become not a kind of noise, but a kind of sign that represents something. Of course, we can have more complex forms of sign like phrases and sentences. This is a kind of semiotic phenomena in our society. So roughly speaking, in this way, we can build form, the symbol systems in our society. This is a kind of bottom-up organizational process of a symbol system. But at the same time, when we form a symbol system, in other words, when symbol systems emerge, that gives us a kind of top-down constraints. What's a constraint? So when we use the symbol system for communication, we should follow the rules of interpretation and usage and some kind of common sense. We cannot really change the meaning that dramatically in everyday communication. Basically, we have to follow the definitions of words and the usage of sentences and expressions. That gives us some constraints. So this also affects our perception in a top-down manner as well. As you know, language has introduced some different system of differentiation in our society. Such differentiation influence and affects our perception as well. So basically, we can call this the emergent symbol system. And there is a kind of micro-macro loop here. Okay, so as a result, we obtain an emergent symbol system. The overall dynamics involves bottom-up organization and top-down constraints. This is sometimes called bidirectional causation in the context of complex and emergent systems. But anyway, I want to emphasize that not only the internal representation of individual agents, but also the symbol system, the external representation of our society is formed, organized in a bottom-up manner, and changes over time. So, as I mentioned, since around 2010, I have been studying symbol emergence in robotics. So, it's a kind of constructive approach to developing artificial cognitive systems and symbol emergence systems to understand them. It is a kind of an extension of the research field of cognitive and developmental robotics. Okay. Symbol emergence in robotics aims to realize a developmental robot that acquires and invent and shares language based on real-world physical and social experience. It's a constructive approach. And okay, so let me show a kind of classical, very old example. This study was conducted more than 15 years ago. So this is one of the representative studies was about unsupervised multimodal categorization and lexical acquisition by robot. This kind of research was conducted so many years ago. That in this experiment, a robot moves around and grasps the object several times to, let me replay the video. So in this experiment, a robot moves around and grasps the object several times to obtain haptic information and shakes it to obtain auditory information and looks at the object to obtain visual information. So it obtains multimodal sensor information. And nowadays, multimodal learning and multimodal representation learning is a very, very ordinary stuff. But at that time, this kind of study was so characteristic. Anyway, so by integrating multimodal sensor information and speech signals, a robot could form the categories discover words and sign directly from speech signals and acquire grounded lexicon. So, and following this kind of study, so many kind of models have been developed. And but basically, they can all be understood as some sort of the predictive or generative models. So roughly speaking, all models can be described like this. So we have a latent variable internally, and we try to predict how the sensory information or sensory motor information will behave. And from other direction, we estimate or infer our internal variables through Bayesian inference. This view is entirely, I think this view is entirely consistent with idea of predictive coding and the free energy principle, world models, and so on. So regarding world models, we wrote some papers together with co-author from the active inference community and Freestone Sensei's group. The like world model and the predictive coding for cognitive and development robotics. So this was written with some roboticians and neuroscientists and cognitive scientists as well. And and we also wrote a paper about the world model learning and inference. The first author is the Freestone Carl. And anyway, so and during this decade, we have developed many unsupervised learning systems and multimodal unsupervised learning system to explain this kind of bottom-up representation learning process. Of course, you can use the many kinds of self-supervised learning and unsupervised learning, which effectively perform representation learning proposed in other AI fields. But today's topic is not about individual representation learning by individuals. So representation learning by individual is just a kind of a first step in modeling simple emergence systems as a whole. We want to move to the more fundamental question about simple emergence by groups. So we want to understand the mechanism and dynamics, how a society forms simple systems, including language, and how simple systems emerge. Okay, then actually, regarding such kind of the formation of language in a society, this kind of topic was also studied in different fields. So constructive studies on language evolution and the symbol emergence or emergent communication have been studied. So it also has a bit long history. In particular, in 90s, Luke Steels and related researchers conducted many studies on language evolution. In this study, agents share signs through language game, a kind of language game. I will skip the detail today. And actually, relatively recently, the deep learning, reinforcement learning method and the referential game-based approach become dominant in the field of emergent communication. But in this talk, here I'd like to talk about a different type of approach. Okay, so maybe this is a kind of a sudden, but let me introduce a new kind of language game called Metropolis Hastings naming game. So it introduced a slight modification to the existing naming game. And as a result, this has a strong and solid mathematical basis. Let me explain what the Metropolis Hastings naming game. First of all, there are two agents. And please consider this agent as a speaker and another as a listener agent. They observe one object and infer their internal representations through Bayesian inference. Here we assume a kind of joint attention. The two agents are looking at the same object. Next, the speaker tells the name of the object probabilistically. So this can be regarded as a kind of the sampling process from the posterior distribution over words. So the listener agent determines if it accepts the naming with a certain probability depending on its belief state. Here, a certain probability is something like this. It's a ratio of how much the other agent's name and the name the listener agents assume match his own belief. So if the agent does not consider the incoming sign to be believable, the listener agent can reject such naming. The reject decision is important. So next, after communication is performed, the listener agent updates its internal parameters for representation learning and naming. And then turn taking happens. So agent B takes the role of speaker. But this is a very simple naming game. So, but this has a very interesting mathematical property. Let's get into the detail. That if the acceptance decision is made with this probability, we can prove that the naming game is equivalent to the Metropolis-Hastings algorithm for the Bayesian inference of the latent variable shared in the right figure, shared in this figure mathematically. Let's start with this graphical model. Here, OA and OB are, for example, the visual observation of each agent. Actually, they can be a multimodal observations, but anyway, let's assume they are the visual observation. And that are internal representations of two agents. And let's assume there is a one variable, W, that is a prior of these two variables. If we consider W as a latent variable, this graphical model is very much similar to the multimodal or multi-view VAE, variational autoencoder, or other multimodal representation learning systems. So if the two agents' brain, metaphorically speaking, if the two agents' brain are connected and using the two observations simultaneously, the agents can update this shared variable W, infer the shared variable. This variable can encode the information of the two agents' input, basically. But if they are independent cognitive systems, this cannot be assumed. We humans cannot connect our brain directly. But let's consider one trick. Algorithmically, we can decompose this model into two parts. The left-hand side represents agent A. Right-hand side represent agent B. And let's consider another way of inference of W. Now let's think about the sampling process. Here, agent A proposes WD by sampling. And after passing it to agent B determines if the sampled variable should be accepted or not. If the probability of acceptance is something like this, the process is equivalent to the Metropolis-Hastings algorithm. Some of you may know that it's a Markov chain Monte Carlo method. So it is guaranteed that the signs are shared and the categories are formed and among agents to approximate the posterior distribution given the two agents' observations. So in some sense, this means through this kind of communication, we can infer the shared representation WD that integrates the information obtained by different agents. Okay, let's move on to the result of the simple experiment. We conducted a small experiment. Of course, we have other agents, but let me explain the simplest one for the illustrative purpose. So agent A observes the MDIST dataset, and agent B observed the kind of rotated the MNIST data. We let the agents play the Metropolis Hastings naming game. Okay, this is the result. If the agents do not perform communication, the performance is something like this. And if the agent performs a Metropolis Hastings naming game, they can share signs, and signs actually the performance of clustering is improved. This is because in this learning process, the categorization process involving representation learning depends not only on a single agent observation, but also the inference of W, take the information of other agents observation as well. So as a result, the information became rich, and the result became better. This implies that the symbol emergence in society is not only for emergent communication, but also for better representation learning. I think this is a very important implication. Okay. In that paper, we conducted the experiment on a slightly different data set on this kind of fruits data. So, and if we are, we are based on this kind of modeling of emergent communication, this gave us a bit different view of communication. So here, the communication is interpreted as an interpersonal cross-modal inference. For example, agent A observe the target and infer the internal variable and infer the corresponding word and then the sampling word or a level. And the receiver agent, listener agent B, infer the internal variable based on the received sign and imagine or reconstruct the image OD. This kind of process can be regarded as a kind of cross-modal inference in multimodal model. But this time, so the cross-modal inference is happening between two different agents. So we can call this the interpersonal cross-modal inference. And another interesting stuff is, please see the red box. This part, please see the all acceptance condition. In this condition, each agent does not reject the other's naming. So interestingly, that if we make the agent accept all samples and the agent do not use their belief state for rejection, they could not successfully form nice representation internally. As a result, they cannot reconstruct the image from signs. It's very interesting, I think. This is because the communication without rejection decision diverges from the theoretical posterior sampling. Because they are not. It's not the MCMC. So the Bayesian inference cannot be conducted successfully without rejection. Okay, So this is a very, how to say, concrete, the computational study. But let me go beyond. So this kind of study and constructive model led us to the new idea of collective predictive coding by creating language and negotiate its meaning. In what direction is society changes? The idea is that by letting language emerge, by letting language emerge, we are sharing we are integrating our sensory motor information and form a kind of the shared representation externally. This is called the collective predictive coding hypothesis. Okay, so could symbol or language emergence in human society viewed as a collective predictive coding? And language, and in our previous work, language game is regarded as a kind of decentralized Bayesian inference of shared W. Okay, so and this is a kind of starting point of the collective predictive coding. And actually, following the previous work that we conducted, we extended our idea in several ways. For example, in this study, this is a kind of experimental semiotic study. We asked the different participants, human participants, play a similar game and evaluate and check if the acceptance ratio of human in this kind of naming game can be modeled by the Metropolis Hastings naming games acceptance ratio. So we got the positive result, for example, and what we showed that in the previous work is kind of the Metropolis Hastings naming between two agents, but we extended this to multiple agent, and also what we show is just a kind of naming game. But imagine communication is important for cooperative behavior. So we extended our idea to the multi-agent reinforcement learning settings. Based on the formulation of control as inference. So, and we successfully extended our idea to the multimodal, the multi-agent reinforcement learning setting. And also in the previous work, we just use a categorical sign, like A, B, C, D, E, or something like that. But of course, our model can be extended to the kind of the sentence-based communication, a sequence of tokens. So, okay, so what I want to say is that this is a kind of a very general framework. Okay. So let me illustrate this CPC hypothesis again. First, let's start from predictive coding or world model learning. There is a person. We assume that he or she internally have internal models, internal representations of world models. We humans are living with action perception loop, and this is very this is a very common understanding of a cognitive system, and roughly speaking, this is this kind of the posterior posterior inference process is corresponding to this part. But we humans, there are so many people, so and they they are interacting with the world as well. But the question arises, so are we actually independently interacting with the world? No. In human society, we are interacting with each other, using kind of semiotic signals and language and other signs. So as a result, we form a language or symbol systems. Following the collective predictive coding hypothesis, through language game, we can form language-like social representation through this learning process. I think through this process, we model and adapt to the world collectively. So this is what's happening I think this is what's happening in our symbol emergence systems. So, and interestingly, we can change our view a bit. So let me take another view. Until now, we believe that each person is an independent and autonomous agent. But let's change the viewpoint a bit. First, language is here. So let's assume language is some sort of the autonomous system. And they have sensors. That's us. Language uses us to model the world through interaction and to get data from the world. And we are somehow subordinate to the language system. This kind of view is often mentioned in sociology and some other academic fields. I think this kind of dual view is very interesting to extend our view of cognition to the social view. And very, very recently, I and my collaborator, Dr. Hayashi, formulated this kind of view from the viewpoint of free energy principle. So if we follow the generative model for collective predictive coding like this, very, very simple, that we are sharing the language as a prior, and the language is a kind of latent variable. So, and we can decompose the generative model and the inference model in this way, and just following the definition of free energy principle by making the language is a kind of internal the latent variable, and we can change the and this is a kind of a final form. Interestingly, we can find 3 terms, and actually these last 2 terms are kind of ordinary variational free energy for each individual agent. So this term is individual prediction error corresponds to, and this is a kind of regularization term. And this is just a summation of K agents. But interestingly, we have another regularization term. So we call this collective regularization term. So this corresponds to the alignments of external representation W conditioned by internal representation Z. And the corresponds to it's related to the symbol emergence. So this part is very interesting because this is not directly related to the observations. This is a relation between the external representation, signs, and internal representations within agents. So I think this is so much related to the idea in semiotics. In semiotics, one of the most important nature of symbols are arbitrariness. So, so signs can represent arbitrary object depending on language, culture, and context. This is widely known, but actually, to my knowledge, no studies in semiotics have pointed out the function of arbitrariness, positive function of arbitrariness. In the theory of symbol emergence, we can say that humans make use of the degree of freedom to optimize our collective regularization, regularization term, and to optimize our collective variation of free energy and change individual variation of free energy minimization problem to a collective variational free energy minimization problem. In other words, while we rely on the plasticity within individual brain, we become a collective social intelligence by exploiting the plasticity of symbolic system. So these are my current speculative thought on human intelligence. So what I mentioned here, these parts are corresponding to the individual, the variation of free energy minimization. And if we add the collective regularization term, this becomes the collective, the free energy minimization, the objective function. Okay, so if I say that, so I think that we as an individuals, we use the neural plasticity to adapt the world as an individual. But I think that we are utilizing some sort of the plasticity in symbol system to adapt to the environment as a collective, a social system, I think. Okay, so following this kind of idea, we are conducting a variety of the related topics. So I'm now involved in the project, Japanese government-funded project about the corpora structure. And actually, based on collective predictive coding hypothesis, I found a connection between symbol emergence and corpora structure alignment. So the hypothesis and questions are something like this. Does learning, that learning existing language facilitates the alignment of people's corpora structure? So maybe that there are many positive evidence about that. But let's update these two emergence to the emergence scenario. The symbol emergence facilitate the alignment of the people's kind of corpora structure. By answering these questions, we can use constructive models. And actually, what we are doing now is based on this kind of CPC-based model. So we are testing when the agents form the shared language having a kind of rich structure can give positive the inference to make the two different agents internal representation system go much aligned. So this is one topic. And also recently, with the discussion with the scholar from philosophy of science, so we are extending this idea to modeling, to formalizing the scientific activity. So actually, the figure representing the CPC, predictive coding, it looks like very much the scientific activity. So encoding the world's structure to a kind of external representation together with other people. So, and I will skip the detail, the explanation about this topic, but I will say, and we not only the emergence of language, but also I think the CPC hypothesis, CPC-based modeling have potential to model many other activities, human activities in a society. So this is based on the kind of the matches, correspondence between the image naming game and the science discussion. Okay. Anyway, so finally, I want to mention one topic about AI alignment. So nowadays, LLM-based AI become more and more powerful on how, and also and actually not only LLM is based on our language, but recently the LLM and many AI systems produces the language, and that actually affect our language activity, data activity. So we are now inevitably, interdependent systems. So now gradually, AI become a part of our society. And the question, how can we collaborate? And how can we evaluate such kind of collaboration? So I think the idea of collective predictive coding can give us another path to model such kind of coexisting the scenario society. So okay. Today this is all from my side today. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for a very exciting presentation, Tadahiro. As is the custom, we will now all unmute and give you a round of applause.
Thank you very much, Horiston Sensei. Long time no see.
So now we will just have some time for discussion and questions from the group. And then I think Carl will summarize in the end. I'll keep an eye on the chat, and if anyone has questions, they can raise their hands. I also do have some questions myself, because this raised a lot of thoughts to me of many different kinds. But I think one good place to start, maybe just to frame the discussion and the summary later, is how can we be helpful, do you think? So what kind of discussion or questions would you think would be most fruitful, Tadahiro?
Actually, anything is okay. So my motivation is to I understand that that you are the specialist or community knows the free energy principle and active inference. So actually, from such kind of perspective, so what do you feel? What do you think? What I'm talking about? And actually, recently, in Japan, there are many young researchers who became interested in this topic, and but I I didn't introduce this kind of idea in Europe and the US so many times.
Mm.
So yes, and actually I want to talk about this. Actually, that's some part of this presentation that I presented in the short talk that in some symposium in front of the Friston
Right.
Friston sensei, Carl. The Carl is online at the time. Yes, this is a good opportunity for me.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, then I will maybe just share a few thoughts that this brought to mind, but that are also questions. But like I said, I'll keep my eyes open for if anyone raises a hand, Michael or Daniel. So I think certainly from the perspective of active inference and collective active inference, as I know it, this fits very well together. And then you show this in the end, of course, but also early on when you did these Metropolis Hastings naming games and so on. Of course, this is a different way of approximating Bayesian inference from what I'm used to, because I use variational methods. But I see that the concept is very similar. I had one thought, and this is that in active inference, the primary component necessary for active inference to apply is for there to be a Markov blanket. And of course, every of these agents you show have a Markov blanket, so a boundary that separates their internal model from the environment. But it struck me that in this picture you show now, actually, the two agents also have a shared blanket separating them from the environment. And even in the collective account you gave, there's also a blanket separating the environment for the whole from the whole population of agents. And so I think it's entirely appropriate to say that the population as a whole of agents is doing Bayesian inference on the environment as well as the single agents.
Yes. That's the point.
And that's very exciting to me.
Yeah. And so actually, when I found this formulation, I was excited.
Yeah, for sure. I am excited now. To be honest, you make me want to come and visit Kyoto or something like this to hear more or see more what you're doing. Okay, so of course, being a modeler, I get excited about simulation and to show this in principle. And I was not completely certain whether you did this. You showed the experiments with many people doing these naming tasks together, but do you have a simulation, let's say, of a whole population of agents interacting with an environment, but also sharing information with each other yet?
Yes. And actually, in this paper, we have just two agents.
Yeah, exactly.
And two different agents perform the representation learning. Basically, it's VAE. On top of VAE, they have a kind of Gaussian mixture model to name the kind of the internal representation and to give the label, the categorical index. So this is one of the simplest stuff. And during they perform the representation learning, they also perform Metropolis Hastings naming game. So that they two different components are optimized simultaneously. And as a result, they form internal representation and shared sign simultaneously. So in other words, I think you are so familiar with the graphical model representation. So in this system, the internal representation and external representation are inferred simultaneously. This can be added as a model of symbol emergence.
Yeah.
And actually, this representation is so general. So actually, W can be anything. W can be anything. Actually, the recent work, it's unpublished. It's not published. Now my students are writing papers, and one study changed this model into two different vision language model. So
Right.
that will become a language or become image and kind of
Yes.
image captioning task.
Yes.
And interestingly, or how to say, so and in another research, we even changed this kind of the collaborative music generation process.
Yes.
That will become a song.
Yeah.
And two
Right.
two composers collaboratively update W or something.
Very exciting. So it struck me that, and I forget the name now, but a different group, because in a sense you take many agents that are human agents and treat them as one big collective system. And of course, the other way is to take one agent and find and split it into, let's say, neurons and treat them as agents that do Bayesian inference as well. So you can show that neuronal activity is also free energy minimum. But so it struck me that a collective of neurons, as in the brain, probably doing something similar. They're also reacting to an environment, being sensory stimulus.
I'm also interested in that kind of discussion. And my limited knowledge and my limited manpower, human resources, I didn't touch that point. But yes, actually, I'm very much interested in the kind of the structure of system, dynamic structure of system. So I think that's something. I'm not sure if they are how to say so structurally same, structure is similar, but yes, so our brain is also collective stuff, collective things, So yes, I think I want to, I want to find some similarity, some and
Yeah, like you said, it's a very general idea that fits also to neurons. So structurally, and not being a neurobiologist, this is a bit outside of my expertise, of course, but structurally, I'm sure there are many differences between a neural network in the brain and a social network.
Maybe summarizing a kind of the similarity and the dissimilarity is a kind of good start to think over. Yes.
But probably neurons also, to some degree, have to align on what signals mean. That's my thought. So probably you showed this very striking result with the free energy minimization of all the single agents, and then a collective kind of an semantic alignment term, right? Supposedly, this was my thought, and I don't know if you agree, but supposedly this is also true for neurons.
Oh, great. Yeah, I want to listen to your more detailed idea. And if you should with some formulation, if you come up with a nice formulation or nice things, yes, I will. Yeah, I want.
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I'm just had the sense that this is probably more general even than just human reflective.
And actually, my coworker, actually Hayashi-san, that he is thinking in another way. He is thinking human society is a kind of brain.
Right.
And
yes.
He is applying the kind of neural network model to model the human communication. And yes. And also, let me add one thing. So you said that you are familiar with the variational inference, and here I show the kind of the image naming game. That is based on the MCMC, metropolis hazing algorithm. But this is kind of initial step, and actually, I like this result. But why I used the image algorithm at this step is that the first thing and the first idea I came up with to decompose one single collective system into two parts in inference process. This is important. As a generative model, this is a single generative model.
Yes, yeah.
So we can decompose it in the inference process. And one part of inference process can be regarded as a language game.
Yes.
I think the language game, I think to my understanding, language game is a kind of decentralized Bayesian inference. This
Yes.
is the idea, one of the central idea in the collective predictive coding.
Yeah.
And actually, after that, I saw that MH naming game is not necessary condition. So after that, my collaborator extended this idea to the how to say, the reformulate the decentralized Bayesian inference. It's a variational inference.
Yeah.
And also, my PhD students extended this idea to the how to say, contrastive learning. Contrastive learning.
Yes, I see.
He designed the kind of language game based on SimScience. So and actually it will be necessary to go further because I think MH algorithm, Metropolis Hastings algorithm is not so fast inference algorithm.
Yeah.
And maybe we face a computational trouble.
Yes.
In the future. So yes, we are working on such kind of detection as well.
You may be interested because it struck me that essentially the models you show here have three components. There's the, as you said, but the first component being the single agent. Yeah, the single agent interacting with the environment and learning its structure, right? And then the second being the social interaction, and the third being, let's say, this collective language structure.
That's right.
So I just thought you might be interested in the structured learning. But there is a structured learning literature within active inference also. So this would just be the first part, but essentially, I suppose alternatives to an MC model of naming, other kinds of structured learning models. And my group happens to work with one type of structured learning models that indeed uses a Gaussian mixture model and variational inference to categorize. Yeah. Okay. So I have just one last question before I think maybe I'm sure we will talk or meet again at some point. But I just have one last question. I was thinking about if indeed this proposal, so you collective predictive coding or decentralized Bayesian inference, I suppose all predictive coding is collective predictive coding in the sense that they are components of many neurons, right?
Right.
But so I had the thought, if there's indeed something in common, or if it's maybe even the same neurons, let's say, communicating or people communicating, I was wondering if there are also differences. And it struck me that, at least in the naming game, what the two agents are doing, they're just saying aloud what they are looking at. Right? They look at the same thing and they say what they think it is. I believe this is in linguistics called ostensive definitions. So you point and you say chair, and then the kid learns, this is a chair. But I was thinking that at least humans can communicate more than just a category with the language.
That's right.
Causal relations or subtypes of categories and so on. And so I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on kind of extending it in this way. So and if that matters for the results you show.
Yes. That's very important point. And we can even just now we are talking about different stuff, So yes. I want to say three things, and actually how to say the first joint attention is still important, I think.
Mm.
So in the I would say the developmental process, like 9-month-old children became able to perform joint attention, and it will be the basis of the it will become a basis of language acquisition in humans. And I think that is somehow supported by the evolutionary perspective as well. So this is one thing, and another thing, but some other scholars point out, and language is not just for the kind of naming or describing something, but for coordination is important. But yes, I think it's important as well. So that here the observation is not just about the kind of external information like visual information or auditive information. That can be actions conducted by agents, and also the kind of how to say, the control as inference framework. I like that. I like that. And change the planning problem in the Bayesian inference problem.
Yeah.
And through this lens, I think the kind of coordination, how to say, the symbol emergent communication coordination can be modeled the similar way. And at that moment, the emerged the symbols, the signs are not directly representing the kind of external the object, but the kind of the messages to coordinate two agents. And I have several papers with my collaborator about this, and but it's not so matured. But I believe how to say the CPC framework have a bit more potential to that. And but another things, but still that kind of model cannot express what we are doing now.
Yeah.
So maybe we need to extend this kind of idea to the kind of the memory level. And I think that during this kind of communication, we have a kind of joint attention on our memory, so
Indeed.
topic,
Yes.
So actually I would say the many linguistic communication does not require the shared environment even. So I think that currently, as I mentioned, we extended this idea to the communication between VLM, Vision Language Model, extending them. But also, I think that we are now planning to, apply this kind of idea to the communication between large language models without observations. Maybe that through this such kind of, such kind of studies, we can find, or we should find, how to apply, how to tell the story of CPC without such kind of direct the sharing of the observations.
I suppose you just made me think this thought, so it might be a silly thought, but I suppose we right now have a shared imagined environment. So we're talking about the same topics, and at least I am thinking about it. Yeah. Okay.
And actually, I'm really interested in such kind of shared world, shared memory, and this figure, So we created a language together. This is the kind of shared representation. So now having this kind of imaginary stuff, I think that affects our kind of shared imagination.
Yeah. Very interesting. Very exciting.
Very speculative.
Yeah, of course. But in a sense, I don't find it implausible that one could simulate at least a simple version of. So if we can simulate agents talking about an environment, I don't find it implausible we can also simulate agents talking about an imagined environment.
I see.
And I guess if you have a big enough community, I mean, I suppose, so I thought, so in predictive coding networks, of course, not all neurons have access to the environment. Most of them indeed are actually only talk to other neurons, but they can still learn about it. And in the same way, I know things about America, even though I have never been there, because people have told me, right? So yeah, so it's just,
Yes.
I'll ask a last small question. The equation you showed, I think on the next slide or so, the one with the three part, yes. How general is this? So is this only for naming games, or is it for all interaction with a shared environment?
I think not only naming game, but also very general. I think.
So this is also
maybe that we can. Yes. Of course, that we can make observation to multimodal.
yes.
And if we consider O as a time series data, so this become a kind of the how to say, the continuous interaction with the world.
Because of course my thought is to simulate some agents, make sure they have a Markov blanket intact in the environment, and this strikes me as suggesting a relationship between those agents and the collective, and that is of interest to me in general, of course. But I think I have spent my allotted time, although maybe in the future we'll have a chance to talk more.
Yes, it's a very good and nice panel discussion, I think.
Yeah, I at least enjoyed it very much. Michael and Daniel, I'll just give you a chance to ask a question, because I find that I have not done so sufficiently until now. And if there are no other questions, then I do believe it is your turn, Carl. Or do you have a question, Michael? I believe you're muted.
No, I'm just fascinated, and I'm much more interested really in the codes within the brain, as opposed to the codes that you've been talking about. And there's obviously that huge gap, but Carl may help me a little bit here. I'm more interested actually in the musical codes. The brain needs musical codes for the musical codes that come from the environment. And so often in these meetings, people avoid music, but I don't want to go there again, but Carl may have some helpful advice about codes.
Sorry, I couldn't catch the last part of your comment or question. Sorry,
don't worry. I'll pick that up.
Carl to the rescue. Perfect. Then I do think that it means it must be your turn now, Carl.
Is it my turn now?
I believe so.
Thank you very much. Right, as Peter said, that was inspirational, extremely exciting work, and I didn't realize you've been doing all this. So I think it is important that you communicate what your work and the excitement in Japan to the European and American community. So have you presented this to the Active Inference Institute?
I didn't.
Right.
I wanted to join the how to say, the international workshop of active inference, EY, but a series of schedule conflict, I couldn't make it.
Right. Well, that was going to be the second suggestion. So next year it's going to be in Montreal. I'm not sure whether there's going to be an online facility, but certainly I think the Active Inference workshop in Montreal, the annual workshop, would be a very useful venue. It's not an enormous venue, but it's a growing community which would be extremely interested in this perspective and this body of work. So I would encourage you, if you can't do it, then to send one of your young people to represent this, at least, alerting people to the work that has been done. But it would be easier, I think, in terms of scheduling and other commitments, to do a live stream presentation or possibly a series of lectures at the Active Inference Institute under the auspices of Daniel Friedman. Peter, could I ask you just to give me your conversations with Daniel on the Active Inference Institute, just suggest that this body of work would be very usefully showcased.
Sure.
And the advantage of that is that it's basically recorded. So there may be 2 or 3 people watching when you're doing it, but it will then go into the archives, and then people can go and retrieve the presentation and the discussion afterwards. So it's a nice way to broadcast a body of work and a perspective. Otherwise, of course, it's just a question of getting all your students to write everything up and producing as many papers as possible for the for the appropriate literatures.
I'll put you in touch with Daniel and recommend, and I'm sure he would be very excited. He is also interested in collective dynamics, so I'm in no doubt. And I agree, Carl, that probably a series of lectures would make sense because there's a lot of material. I'll write a note of this.
Yes, that's a good point, Peter. That you covered so many issues, it's going to be difficult for me to summarize them. And also, it would be difficult for an audience to keep up with the number of ideas. So you might think about doing 2 or 3 lectures, a lecture series, live streamed, but then recorded with the Active Inference Institute, so that people can go watch one lecture, then go to the next one, and then go to the next one. That might be a better way of communicating the ideas, so that you don't overwhelm people with all the ideas.
Sorry for
and as Peter said, all of this is, I think, perfectly aligned, and indeed, you've actually proved that mathematically with joint free energy minimization, and which would be, if you like, a mathematical expression of collective predictive coding. If you commit to a definition of predictive coding as a particular kind of variational inference that happens to deal with continuous state space models and Gaussian random effects. So your approach, I think, is exactly what one would want to see in terms of applying the free energy principle, not just to an individual, but to a collective sense making and active sense making, where, of course, communication is an act. I think this is not only is this an interesting in Japan, it's interesting worldwide, but the advances you have made may not be paralleled everywhere. So what I've done is, while you were talking, I was going through identifying some key papers that you probably know about, and if you don't, I am going to show them, so that when you present, or when you write your whole your series of papers for the European and American audience, you can sort of refer to related ideas that endorse or substantiate the story that you are trying to tell. So some of them are not technically very relevant, but they're just interesting philosophical or ethological or dynamical systems or quantum information theoretic perspectives on these issues that you could usefully introduce, just to join the dots in terms of the literature, and provide engage other communities in this formalism. And I will address very briefly, music. Just two. Just one little point while we have the slides up, while you're sharing the screen. This particular decomposition, I think, is really very intriguing, and could be read in, as you note, several ways, providing different perspectives on the same thing. You could just regard this as a deep generative model, or a deep partially observed Markov decision process, where the deepest or the highest latent variables W provide empirical priors or inductive biases that regularize the individual belief updating at a lower level. Excuse me. And that would be that would be one perspective, and I think quite a useful perspective, because people can say, oh, I see. So what you're saying is that language or semiotics or the symbols that have emerged are just providing constraints on belief updating amongst individuals, and those constraints minimize the complexity and maximize the model evidence of each individual and collectively free energy or marginal likelihood. And this is why semiotics or language or a cultural niche is an aspect of joint free energy minimization or collective behavior. The perspective you took, which I thought was very interesting, which I had not heard before, was that the latent variables or states W now live on their own as a cultural environment, as a semiotic environment, and that they are basically making sense of all the communication amongst the members of that environment, which I thought was a very nice perspective, and not unrelated to the work of Peter, in terms of, so Peter, I think it would also be useful to send him your recent Frontiers paper, where you look at the generative model of individual Markov blankets in a community, and then say, now let's look at the Markov blanket of the community, and let's see if the collective has a generative model that is jointly optimized with each individual one. That might be, another useful perspective. I couldn't find the paper, but if you could send it, I think that might be quite useful.
I do think probably you already saw that, right, Tadahiro?
Yes.
I think you wrote an email a while ago.
Oh, good. Okay, fine.
But for sure, that's a point of contact.
Yes, I'm also aware that this is being recorded as well. So for other people, just to alert people to the fact there is a Frontiers paper that takes that.
It's an entropy.
It's an entropy. Is it? My apologies.
Yeah,
entropy.
yeah, for the birthday special edition.
Oh, right. Okay. There is another, a third perspective, which I'll introduce briefly at the end, which you might want to think about, which is more closely related to the notion of cultural niche construction, where you consider the environment as the agent, which I think is possibly closer to what you were introducing when the environment and the cultural environment or the semiotic environment was somehow looking at the occupants of that environment, which were the communicating collective. So that has, well, I'll come to that in a moment. Could we go to the previous slide as well? Because while you have the control of the screen. Yeah, one thing which you might want to say in presentation is that all the brains on the blue circle cannot be independent. And that follows simply from the fact that all of those brains, or all the white brains, are part of the Markov blanket of the black brain. And that's because the Markov blanket includes the parents, the children, and the parents of the children. So the black brain has a child that is the world,
Yes.
and the parents of the world include the white brains. So by construction, just having a shared world literally means that you cannot be conditionally independent of other people who share your world, because they are part of the same Markov blanket. So on that interpretation, your blue circle now is literally a Markov blanket, and everybody who's looking at the world is part of the same Markov blanket, and therefore are by construction, they have to be conditionally dependent. And then you can say, well, that means that there is some common latent state that they share, and then that becomes your emergent symbol system.
I didn't have such kind of viewpoint, but yes, it's very clear, and yes.
Which means that you have to be right. You must be right, mathematically speaking, that the statement that you cannot treat members of the same community as independent, just don't, they have to be conditionally dependent because they're looking at the same child.
Great. Yeah.
Good. Okay. I'll just briefly go through the papers. I thought you might. You probably know them, and if you don't, I repeat, they're really here just to allow you or your students to mention these perspectives in the discussion of the papers that you're writing. So I'm going to now try and claim the screen, and we're going for the entire screen. And my hope is, well, in fact, let's just start with this one. This is quite an old paper now, written by colleagues in the Netherlands, particularly Jelle Brunenberg, but also with Eric Rietveld, and he has a friend called Julian Kiverstein. So these are a group of theoreticians who are very interested in sort of niche construction, affordances, and joint attention, but from a sort of philosophical and biological perspective. But this particular work was interesting. What it did is just inverted the story about the environment and asked the question, could you simulate the environment learning about the people in the environment? And that simulation was in terms of things called desire paths or elephant paths, which is this phenomena where if we all take the same cut across some grass, then we wear or we make a track that other people can see, and that provides a sometimes called a deontic cue for optimal behavior. But the other perspective is that the environment, the grass, is actually learning about how the people in that environment are using the environment. So you can simulate that. And it struck me that would be another perspective on W that's outside, looking at all the communicating people, that you could actually think about, well, what would it mean if I now wrote down a generative model for the semantic or semiotic environment, and what the generative model sees are all the communications between the brains in the community. And I'm just wondering whether that's another perspective on the emergence of a cultural environment that is distinct from the physical environment, where the cultural environment, possibly described as memes, MEMES, itself is learning a generative model of the language.
Yes. Yes. That's actually what I wanted to build, the theory that I wanted to build. Yes. meme is a kind of the autonomous system itself, and that
Yes.
that somehow controlling ourselves.
And literally controlling in the sense that it's providing, from our perspective, it's providing environmental or empirical constraints. But from its perspective, we are just providing evidence that the meme is a good meme, and it explains the communication. So there's a lovely circular causality.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes.
absolutely. Good.
Absolutely.
So that was this one. So where's that? So we've seen this one. This this is just work by my colleague Chris Frith, who in the world of psychology and schizophrenia research has done a lot to understand communication and a theory of mind from the point of view of Bayesian inference. And I'm just showing this because this is one of his favorite papers, showing that two agents or two robots are better than one. So it was just a piece of empirical evidence. So this was an empirical psychophysics study, but motivated by the same kind of Bayesian arguments that you were using to demonstrate that not only does the emergence of a symbolic constraint on your belief updating help in terms of individual explain the emergence of semiotics, but also it provides the collective with more precise and efficient inferences. And they just demonstrated this by having two people looking at the same screen, making a difficult decision. But when they were able to tell each other what they thought, their collective behavior was much better than the best of the individual behaviors. So it's simply an empirical example that is motivated in a narrative way from the Bayesian brain, but to speak to the importance of having these good memes or good semiotics or good words that explain or enable us individually and collectively to make sense of things. And I put that up. No, okay. Let me just come to this one that was written with Chris Frith. And this is just I introduced this paper just to make 2 points. The first would be speaking to Michael's question about can you generalize this approach to understand not language but music, and to a certain extent, in a very simple way, this paper addresses that by thinking about dyadic interactions in a very similar way to the way that you formulated it, but as mediated by predictive coding using songbirds, so birds that sing songs. So the idea was to have just 2 birds with initially different generative models of how they would produce a particular song, a sequence of not musical symbols, because this was actually in predictive coding. So we actually used Lorentz attractors, so it was continuous, but still has a continuous code for a particular sequence of chirps in birdsong, and then just asking what would happen if 2 birds were singing together, as opposed to not singing together. So here they're singing. They are singing, and crucially, something that which you mentioned makes this work, which is the turn taking. So one bird is singing, the other one is listening, and then they switch. The other bird sings, and then the first bird listens. But they start off with different generative models, so they're quite incoherent. But if they come to share their generative model, then ultimately they'll be able to sing in synchrony. So each bird now starts to take on and carry on the narrative, the sequence of codes in their shared generative model of this particular song. In this instance, this is not language. This is more like music. The reason I'm pointing this as an example is because it uses continuous state-space generative models. The variational inversion is technically predictive coding. So as opposed to having any discrete or Gaussian mixture models on it, or sort of vector quantized variational autoencoders. So I think that, in a very simple way, the collective predictive coding notion can be generalized, not just to sequences of symbols, but also implicit symbols in the dynamics of continuous systems. But the reason I wanted to show it was that there's an interesting phenomenon that when one of the talkers has more precise beliefs about the lexicon and the broadcasting of, in this instance, a song, than the other one, then the generative model of the other bird tends to be drawn to the more precise one. So you get an interesting asymmetry where you get a kind of teacher, student, parent, child, master, slave kind of dynamic, which means that the person who shouts loudest tends, and most confidently and most precisely, tends to have more effect on the emergent dynamics, the shared dynamics. So I thought that was interesting. The final reason I thought this was interesting in terms of what would be useful for you in terms of explaining to other communities, if you wanted to talk to the dynamical systems community, then what you are describing in terms of a joint free energy minimization and the emergence of symbols or memes that constrain the exchanges can also be described mathematically as synchronization of chaos. So if it's a different kind of mathematical picture, but it's the same thing in the sense that the free energy minimizing solution for coupled dynamical systems lies on something called the synchronization manifold. And that synchronization manifold is when everybody is synchronized and in harmony, and all their reference frames are aligned, and so it makes them mutually predictable. So to conclude, this perspective allows you to talk about synchronization of chaos, also known as generalized synchronization, in a way that people from dynamical systems theory would understand. And it's exactly the same phenomena. It's just finding that minimum free energy solution on a synchronization manifold. So I thought that might be useful in terms of reaching out to the dynamical systems community. Where are we there? Okay. I mentioned, and you mentioned on several occasions, the reference frames as an important aspect of alignment. And if you wanted to talk to quantum information theorists, or again, just mention what you have in mind here, what you mean here from the perspective of quantum information theory are quantum frames of reference. This is work by Chris Fields I think would be quite useful for you. So this is one of a number of papers he's written drawing an analogy between the Markov blanket and the holographic screen, or more generally, the free energy principle and the principle of unitarity, where everybody becomes entangled. So if you can imagine from the point of view of quantum information theory, you take any joint system that is separated by a shared screen, which would be your world, for example, or it could be the means. It could, it's something that both you and me can read and write to. So we share that screen, but that screen separates us. So I can never know what you are doing, other than what you write to that screen, and then I can read what you wrote, and then I can write to that screen, and then So this is, if you like, a quantum information theory calculus for communication via a particular communication channel. And if everything, when I have learned to understand you, and you have learned to understand me, then we now become ultimately entangled, and that's the principle of unitarity, which means that we become conditionally dependent. Again, from a classical perspective, that would be generalized synchronization, but from the quantum perspective, this would be an entanglement. But to get there, we have to align our quantum frames of reference. So I thought that would be useful for you in saying that, part of the problem that you're contending with in terms of, or perhaps not a problem you're contending with, but what you are trying to explain is how we align ourselves in terms of frames of reference, so that I understand what you mean by a particular word, and you understand what I mean by the same particular word. So that problem has a very well-defined structure in terms of reference frames in quantum information theory. Again, it's not going to be useful for you. You have solved the problem. It's just a way to reach out to other communities who are thinking about these things from the point of view of not quantum computing. So I don't know if Neo's still into that, but from the point of view of quantum information theory. Now what we do? Oh, I just have you read this this literature by people like Maxwell Ramstead and Lawrence Kermere? Is this?
I don't remember. Sorry, I might have, but I don't remember.
Well, it's just that some of the words that you use and the ideas that you expressed are very sympathetic and aligned with this group of theoreticians who come from Montreal in Canada. And so, again, you're not going to learn anything that you do not know, but you will find a narrative account of the importance of joint attention, for example, and regimes of attention and affordances, and also a philosophical perspective on cultural niche construction, which might be useful. So I just put this up as an example of this more philosophical, ethological literature that touches upon some of the emergent dynamics and belief updating that you have been simulating. How do we? Ooh. Can't get that one. Oh, I just put this up particularly to foreground the work of this gentleman here, who was a student of Tommaso, that brought a linguistics perspective to collective predictive coding, or symbolic emergence, framed in terms of common ground. So in this literature, which again is not a mathematical literature, it's more of a sort of almost psychological, social neuroscience, ethological literature, the notion of common ground, I think, is exactly what you were speaking to, and how do you establish it, and how it is enabled and it is emerges from a symbolic representation. And you were dealing with the mechanics of it. But he goes through in this paper a free energy perspective, but that's not why I'm showing it. I'm really showing it just so that you can now see the links with the way that people in this field would talk about common ground and cooperation through communication and the emergence of language from a cultural perspective. So that may or may not be useful. What's this? Oh, yes, this is. Oh dear. That's gone away. Never mind. It's just that one. Yeah. This is by the same group before from Montreal, and they're just talking about a variational theory of signs with specific reference to semiotics. I repeat, this is not going to affect your work, but it's just a nice reference, for people in philosophy dealing with these issues or thinking about these issues from that perspective. Cultural forms, yes, so we've done that one. That was the same group of people. This is work which we have done recently, and notice that the senior author was the same person that I introduced, talking about two minds better than one. This paper, I think, is probably the most interesting for you. It's not as sophisticated as your work, but it does address the particular problem of the alignment of likelihood mappings when you are in a position to be able to share your beliefs. And what it shows is that alignment can be an emergent property of variational inference under discrete, partially observed Markov decision processes, and that is read as the fact that when we share the world, then language, and you could argue symbolic, the emergence of symbols implicit in language, is an emergent property. Simply by minimizing joint free energy locally, you can get this emergence. So I repeat, this is not a very sophisticated example, but it involves simulating three sisters who are playing hide and seek with their mother, and they can shout or say where they think their mother is. So they share the same world, but they're looking at different parts of the world. So they can tell their sisters where their mother is, and enable their sisters to form precise beliefs about where their mother is, if and only if there is a mapping between the language and the generative model of where the mother is. So he uses this basic setup and then goes on. The most important part is the emergence of a shared likelihood mapping between the beliefs, the posterior beliefs of in this instance, three agents, and the things that they say. And this is if you like, the free energy minimizing solution to the shared understanding or sense making of the world. So from your point of view, I thought this would be useful, because it's just one illustration of the fact that symbolic emergent systems are not something you have to design. If everything is working properly, they can't be any other way, in the sense that these are the free energy minimizing solutions when we all share the same world. It doesn't go as far as this, the world of memes, but it does show that using numerical studies, this alignment can be an emergent property, because in order to minimize my free energy on the basis of what you see of the world, I have to align with you by sharing the same generative model, but also the same mapping between what I report or reject in terms of the Metropolis, the MCMC version that you are using. So we have to have, if you like, aligned likelihood mappings when we're actually talking or sharing the semantics or our description of the symbolic representation. So that may, I think, probably be of more interest for you, Barry P, not because it's simulating what you're simulating, but it is just a numerical proof of principle that this alignment can be an emergent property. And I think actually, yeah, Chris Fields, who did the quantum information work, was also a co-author on this, and all the co-authors wrote little sections from their perspective. So there was a perspective from cultural niche construction, perspective from quantum information theory, which may contain some useful references in terms of foregrounding the universal importance of this kind of collective predictive coding. And that's it. I've run out of papers now. There we go.
Oh, can I just quickly say something, then I need to go. That was very fascinating indeed. I do apologize about the two things. One is that bird paper, I remember you presented this at, was it a Royal College of Psychiatry meeting or a neuropsychiatry meeting? You presented data in sessions to do with music, I think. And I have forgotten it. I wondered if you could just let me have that paper, because it was very, very fascinating. But the one thing I say these things because I listen so much, and I do like the idea of music. Carl, I would rarely disagree with you, but you said that music was not a language. Music is a language, and so much of what you were saying about coordination, for example, has been shown in choir singers, for example, how they can be entrained together and very rapidly in terms of their autonomic system and their brain systems, if you like. So please consider music to be a very important.
So my apologies. So, what I was trying to say is it will be difficult to write it down as a discrete Markov decision process. It's easy to do it continuous. Yes. That's what I meant, really. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, many thanks. But if you could just let me have that one paper or the reference to it, I'd be most grateful.
No problem.
Okay, many thanks. It was very interesting. And thank you very much for a lovely presentation. Okay, bye now. Bye.
Bye.
I suppose if there's not anything left, Carl, from your side or from Tadahiro's side, then now's the time we.
So he has already left, but I want to let me share one paper. And this is just a kind of the perspective paper, and I was talking about the kind of the how to say structural similarity between the emergence of language and music. You know, I was yeah. This is kind of that view, and yeah. So that music.
Sure.
I'm sharing. Can you see my screen?
Yes. No, perhaps we could send. Can you show me the title again, and I'll send it to Michael.
Yeah, and maybe later I can share this.
Oh, okay. Yeah. If you send it to Peter, and I'll send the other one to Peter, then he can send it back to all of us. That would be very good. Yes.
That has a preliminary thought, you know. And
I'm not sure I have Michael's email, Carl. So you might just.
Oh well, if you send it to me, then I'll send it to Michael with a copy to you, and then we've all got a copy of it. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay.
I think that the importance of predictive coding is that we in the scenario, in the kind of theory of the predictive coding, we can deal with the emotion as well. So that is also interesting point, I think. So the music, the language, when we talk about the language, we tend to talk about the captioning or some describing external sense. But when we talk about the music and the art, maybe people tend to talk about emotion. So, but yes, then when we think about the predictive coding of the interception, so that it can be the part of the collective predictive coding,
Yes, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, Michael, Professor Trimble will like that. Yes, that's he likes that. As we all do. We all like music.
Thank you. Okay.
All right.
Thanks so much.
No, thank you for the presentation. We'll give you one last round of applause before we end.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and have a very nice day from here on out.
Thank you very much for many questions and also the suggestions and the information as well.
And I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Keep in touch.
Mm.
So,
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Have a nice day.